you talk a little bit about what the actual ramifications would be if we went to war or if America got drawn into this war with Iran?
Well, I have some information this evening that suggests it's not a matter of if, that the 2 week pause is actually more about us, the U.S. actually moving back into the region in terms of strengthening up our air and naval defenses. That's the information that I'm hearing. So this supposed 2 week pause for Trump to think about the action, from what I understand this evening, the action is already decided upon and that we will be involved.
And with that, President Trump, the idea that he's around why he said we're going to do a 2 week pause was because he said he wanted to have more time to negotiate with Iran. But he pulled out the JCPOA in 2018. What exactly is he trying to negotiate now that wasn't in the JCPOA that he already withdrew from?
Well, it's one of those, tricks that Trump does all the time. He creates the problem and then he tries to pretend as if he's solving the problem that he created. Trump, one, absolutely created the problem, pulling out a JCPOA, better known as the Iran nuclear deal. And that was a mistake. And we're seeing a lot of those consequences today. We're seeing the consequences of a lot of bad foreign policy decision making. And at least in Trump 1, there were some adults in the room. There were some guardrails, but there aren't right now. And so while we are in real time seeing the consequences domestically, we see it every day of this election. Things are starting to bear out geopolitically with the consequences of this election. And one thing that I want to lean into is, yes, there is a concern about, Iran enriching uranium beyond the 5% threshold, hanging around somewhere about 60%, because that means that you are very close to making a nuclear weapon. That part is a reality. However, what's going on behind the scenes and what needs to be elevated more, and I did hear you mention this, is this idea of regime change, but regime change in a very different way. The first thing I'll say is anytime there's some sort of regime change via violence, it doesn't work out. You mentioned Afghanistan, Vietnam, I could go on and on and on. It typically doesn't work out. Maybe about 2 months ago, Ben Rhodes wrote this really interesting piece about this concept called the spheres of influence, basically about not so much countries wanting to be the superpower, but regional powers amassing hegemonic control. And so in terms of regime change in the region, it seems as if Israel wants to be the top dog in the region, and it's going to do it by any means necessary. And I also want to point out to the audience that this isn't a new situation. Netanyahu has been talking about this particular thing regarding Iran and it's building its nuclear capabilities since the 90s. This plan, for all intents and purposes, has been in existence for at least a decade. But the guardrail that existed were typically the U.S. American presidents. That guardrail no longer exists. One of the reasons could be not just the fact that, Trump is inept, but secondly, we want to control the world's crude oil and gas reserves. And I need to put this into context. You showed that map, but why is it always so much drama in the Middle East? There are historical reasons, but when you have oil come into the mix, the U.S. is said to want to control those reserves. And so Iran is responsible for about 1/5 of the global consumption of crude oil and gas. The one lever that Iran is threatening to pull is to close or to disrupt transportation through the Strait of Hormuz. And why is that important? About 19 million barrels a day goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is right between Iran and Oman. And so Iran is threatening to disrupt that flow of oil and gas. I'm sorry. And we're already seeing evidence of it. I mean, just the other day, I saw gas in my neighborhood go up 10%, and then the following day it went up 10%. So we will feel those very real consequences in our gas tanks if the United States enters, well, from what I'm hearing today, there's no if. It sounds like we are. It's just a matter of when.
And just real quick before we go to the panel, I want you to give you an opportunity to kind of drill down on that last aspect, because often I think we get Middle Eastern fatigue in America. We're so used to America and Israel dropping bombs on some country in the Middle East, we don't really pay attention to the actual consequences. There's a reason we haven't bombed Iran, because they actually have the ability to punch back, as we're seeing in Israel right now as ballistic missiles are hitting hospitals and other facilities. A part of the Iranian response has been articulated all the way back to President Raisi and even to Ahmadinejad, was the idea of not just mining and shutting off the Straits of Hormuz, but also the destruction of the Suez Canal. I want people to understand that a few years ago, you had the Suez Canal shut down for like a week, and it closed down global shipping for over a year. Can you talk about what the real world implications would be of a war with Iran, where both the Straits of Hormuz were shut down, the Suez Canal was shut down, and then we're making the Malacca dilemma even worse for most people?
Well, one of the major consequences is just yesterday, Putin and Xi basically said, keep your hands off Iran. China gets about 20% of its oil and gas from Iran. Putin has, I should say Russia. Russia had entered an agreement in January with Iran, a strategic agreement saying that they will come to each other's aid. This agreement covers everything from energy to defense. So I had said, at the start of this, that Iran isn't what people think it is. That back and forth that Tucker Carlson did with Ted Cruz was important for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that he was trying to drill down on is, I said, Iran ain't no punk. And what I mean by that is we are talking about 91 million people. We are talking about a very large continental sovereign country who has very important friends. China and Russia will come to Iran's aid. In Beijing, they are talking about this as Israel's I'm sorry, it literally just left my mind because I'm so overwhelmed with what's happening right now. It is, oh my goodness, I cannot believe it'll come back to me. But this isn't seen as something that needed to happen. This was an aggressive. I got it. Iran's Pearl Harbor. That's how Beijing is talking about what Israel did to Iran. And while I'm not going to sit here and say that there isn't a worry about Iran enriching, because if that weren't a worry, the Obama administration would have never entered into the JCPOA with them. That is a thing. That is a thing. But to use that as a reason to aggressively invade, that's another thing. It's kind of breaking the law. And so now you have the United States counting on Israel and the United States to win against Iran. It's not going to be that easy. Iran has friends. They have important friends. And to your point that you just made, their ballistic missile, they have about a total about 300 ballistic missiles, and they've only gone through about a fraction of those. Israel is having problems, having spent $67 billion in Gaza. They're spending $700 million a day trying to beat Iran. Their economy is struggling. Yes, so is Iran's economy struggling from all the sanctions. But again, Iran ain't no punk. It's not just going to roll over and capitulate because Trump thinks he's the strong guy from New York and thinks he's in a mob movie 24/7. That's not how this is going to happen.
I think that's an important point, because people need to understand the difference between a nation state and a civilization state. A nation state like America or some of these other countries, where we've been around for a few hundred years, things have been great. When you're talking about civilization states, you're talking about the Indus Valley. You're talking about the Tigris and Euphrates. You're talking about the Yellow River. You're talking about Turkey, Iran, India, China. Civilizations that have been around for thousands of years, and you don't stick around that long, getting punked up by Donald Trump. I want to go to our panel, give them an opportunity to ask some questions about this. I'm going to go to Michael Imhotep first.
Hey, NOLA, good to see you again. Thanks for this breakdown. Can you talk briefly about the relationship between Iran being overthrown in 1953 by the CIA, and then also Great Britain and what became the British Petroleum Oil Company, please?
I am not about to sit here and talk about no CIA operations.
Oh,
I will
well,
not.
there's an article. The reason why I asked, this a Washington Post article came out June 19, 2025. The U.S. helped oust Iran's government in 1953. Here's what happened. So I was just tying all that together. Talk about what you want to deal with.
This is what I will say. To my earlier point, when you try to topple a regime, it never works out. We have made this mistake over and over and over. And here we are setting ourselves up for the same kind of mistake without the same sort of brain power in the room. Let's be very clear. We're not talking about smooth operators here. We are talking about people that are in the Capitol right now who literally operate as like the B-roll from some sort of like Goodfellas Part 5 or something. Like, I'm not even kidding when I say that, but to your point, it never works out. It literally never works out. And we're going to get drawn into this long, long thing. And it's not going to work out the way that they think it's going to work out.
I think to that point, we've spent $1 billion in the last 4 months, I think, bombing the Houthis as part of Operation Rough Riders. We bombed them for 5 months. It's been $1 billion. We lost 2 to 3 F-18s to drop to the bottom of the Red Sea. We still haven't beat them. And that is the B minor league squad to Iran. And I want people to look at that map of the Middle East again and realize that Iran is not flat. Those are all mountains. It's almost impossible to invade that country. You can't do a sea-bound invasion. You can't invade through, there's literally one corridor where you can invade through. So if you think we're gonna drop a couple bombs to be out by the weekend, you got another thing coming. Matt, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Dr. Hayes, good to see you. Quick question. What is your thought about how this reverberates out to Saudi Arabia, Jordan, some of the other countries that are near there, particularly with our relationship with Saudi Arabia? How does that affect our involvement and maybe escalation? And just what are your general insights in that respect?
I mean, instability, it's instability, even before the Trump administration, which I have some knowledge about in terms of how difficult navigating this very tenuous relationship between all of these different countries already was, right? We were inching towards having agreements between Saudi Arabia and Israel, not necessarily strategic partnerships, but some sort of a more friendly agreement, right? And then Hamas did what it did in October 2023. So the situation was already fraught. And right now, there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of insecurity. Donald Trump does this thing where he thinks it's cute. Oh, they don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep it under my hat. He thinks that's cute. That's not how you do international security. That's not how you handle geopolitics, right? So it's going to cause a lot of instability, but where we're going to see it and why this matters for U.S. is we're going to see it at the gas tank. And we are already threatening inflation with tariffs and all these things. So it's just going to complicate an already fraught situation here at home and abroad.
And on
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
Sorry, very quickly. Does that mean then you think that we'll be boots on the ground in Iran and then also in a lot of those surrounding countries for security purposes? I mean, what does that look like in terms of mobilization of forces?
Well, right now it's air and naval. In terms of boots on the ground, we do have a few boots on the ground helping man the THAAD batteries. In terms of will that look like more traditional conventional warfare with boots on the ground? I don't know. Directly in Iran, I've been thinking a great deal about that, but that doesn't mean not in other areas. To your point, that it may come to that.
Thank you.
And Doctor, I wanted to just kind of ask about what the terms are that President Trump is trying to push the Iranians towards when he talks about wanting to have a negotiation, wanting to have a deal. That if you look at what the JCPOA mandated. It was 3.67% enrichment. Now Iran's at 60%. They can be at 90% potentially within a year, which is necessary to get the 27 kilograms of enriched uranium needed for an atomic device. You then put it on a launcher, takes maybe another 6 months, and now you have a functioning nuclear weapon. From what it sounds like, the Trump administration is suggesting a nuclear consortium where Iran, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, UAE would share nuclear production, and therefore Trump would actually be able to essentially profit from this nuclear deal. Can you kind of talk about what exactly Trump is trying to get Iran to agree to?
Right. So, with Trump, it's always about how can he make a quick buck, right? There's everything from, let me back up a little bit. For whatever reason, this administration, you don't have to see anything. You don't have to see a plan. It changes from moment to moment. One moment it could be, completely abandoning their nuclear program to, like you said, this consortium deal. Again, this kind of opaqueness where Trump thinks it's cute. He thinks that's how you move and maneuver. That is not what you do diplomatically. That is not what you do in a foreign policy space, especially when you're talking about nuclear security. My worry is this, because of Israel's move, that this will actually quicken the pace of Iran actually developing, a weapon, if maybe they already haven't. And then I also want the viewers out there to understand something. So countries like China and Russia, one of the things that they have done when they come together, they always call the U.S. out for our own hypocrisy. And so one of the things that's coming out of Beijing is that they are having a hard time with Israel's hypocrisy regarding their nuclear weapons that they have never said that they've had. Let's just be very clear about that. So while Israel is saying, Iran is enriching at 60%, and this is an existential threat to us, and I'm not saying that it's not, at the same time, you clandestinely also have these weapons that sometimes you make vague threats to use against other people. So this is a very interesting situation. Beijing is calling for the entire region to completely disarm, not to develop any further. That's what I think the smart action is, because we've seen over time from the 50s to the 70s to the 90s, this region is always ripe with tensions. And to think about all of these different countries having a nuclear capability, even though I definitely believe in mutually assured destruction as a form of deterrence, I don't know. The tensions, historical tensions are just always boiling up and boiling over. And what we have seen in the last couple of years is that they are willing to go there. And weapons technology has gotten a lot better. I think people tend to think about the Middle East as people living in these huts somewhere, amongst all this sand. That ain't it. That's not it. So I need people to understand where we are. This is a very dangerous moment, as weapons technology is in a place that it's never been in before. Production of drones are really cheap. Like I said earlier, Iran has, hundreds of ballistic missiles, and Israel is limping along. The Iron Dome isn't really performing the way that it performed before. So this is a layered situation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for keeping us updated on this. I remind people that the same way Israel secretly has nuclear weapons, Iran very well may have a whole basement full of them that we don't know about, that they bought from India or Pakistan or Russia or China. So maybe it ain't a good idea to go start bombing people when you don't know what they got. As we say in the outcast rules of Atlanta, don't pull the thing out unless you plan to bang. You better know those things. Thanks so much, Dr. Hayes, for being with us.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.